Hi, everyone. I'm Chuck Murphy, and I'm joined today by Maggie Bright and Sarah Marion, and we are going to talk about New Year's resolutions. And over the last 2 years, there's been a dramatic decline in resolutions, and we've had some internal debate on why that is and what that means, and we thought we'd make a podcast episode about it. So join us for a quick half-hour discussion on resolutions and all of the latest trends. Hi, everyone. I'm Chuck Murphy, and I'm joined today by Maggie Bright and Sarah Marion. Sarah runs our State of Our Health tracking study, which is a deep dive into health and fitness and mindfulness that runs every single day of the year and has been up for a number of years. And one of the components of that study that we talk about every January is New Year's resolutions. So normally we're kind of looking at the resolutions themselves. But obviously, over the last couple of years, there's been this tremendous macro event around COVID that has impacted people's lives in such a major way, and so we've been trying to kind of untangle how that impacts people's resolutions from what might be long term trends. And one of the things we've been talking about over the last week or two is the fact that over the last 2 years, resolutions have dropped pretty rapidly during COVID. Sarah, you want to talk a little bit about the decline of those? Do you have those numbers in front of you, or would you rather I read them off?
No, I have them. Thanks for having me. So this year, 2022, we saw 32% of Americans aged 13 and up making New Year's resolutions, or at least reporting that they made a New Year's resolution. Most of them make three or fewer. Two-thirds only make two resolutions, which is a nice doable amount. So there's reason for hope there. And this is essentially the same as last year, 2021. So the darkest depths of the pandemic, 31% of Americans made resolutions. So essentially unchanged. And that is really dramatically down from previous years. So in 2019, we have about half of people making resolutions. And then in the year before, sorry, that was 2020. I get all my years mixed up now because time is a mush. Yeah. And then in 2019, 62% said that they made resolutions. So this is a really steep drop off.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that when we saw that last year, I think it made a little bit more, some of the decline made more sense in the middle of COVID, but the fact that it's dropped so dramatically is really kind of shocking. Half as many people are making resolutions, which is a little bit of a pessimistic and depressing stat. And I think that that's where this conversation started. Is the three of us were talking, and I asked the question of whether this is a long term trend that's somehow been accelerated by COVID, something like working out at home or something like that. And I feel like Sarah very quickly said no to that, and I thought that would led to thinking, oh, this is an interesting discussion for a podcast, because I do think there's a lot to unpack here, and maybe we start with Maggie. You want to tell us how you interpret that sharp decline?
I think Sarah made a really good point at the outset when she was trying to remember what year it was. I think there's just this feeling of one year bleeding into the next during this pandemic, and sort of some of the optimism has left a lot of people. And I am a habitual resolution maker. I over-index on number of resolutions, and I tried not, I mean, but this was the first year that I really was like, I don't know if I should make any resolutions, or maybe I'll only make one. Unfortunately, I'm habitual in my resolution making, so I still have 10. But I seriously thought about not making one this year for the first time in probably my entire adult life. And I think it's because it's so hard to find your bearings right now, whether that be related to just, chronological time and space type things, or knowing what next month is going to look like, or even next week. And I think the Omicron variant hit at a time when we would have started to really think about what our resolutions are and how to move forward and make a fresh start in 2022. And it was almost impossible to do that with more things shutting down, and the need for more testing, and the inability to find tests. And so I think it made us much more recluse in the new year. I mean, probably comparable to what we saw in 2021, but so much more so than 2020 or 2019. So I think I hope that there's a rebound next year because I think that that would signify that people feel optimistic again. I think there will be. I think there's always going to be kind of like a lot of other areas where there's always going to be that third of the population that makes them no matter what, because that's kind of who they are. Um, but I hope, that others will join that movement. I guess I'm an eternal optimist, so maybe that's why I hope so much. But that's my thoughts on it.
And just to be clear, is 10 a decline for you, or is that the average number of resolutions you make, or is that more?
Oh my gosh, I'm embarrassed. I just counted them. I actually have 12. So I made more.
Maggie is a true outlier in resolutions.
Well, I don't know if you remember, Chuck, but when we did this for the very first time, it was because I said I make 10 resolutions and you said that's insane. And you said that's crazy. And I said, oh, I bet a lot of people make that many resolutions. And so we fielded this study and found out that I am insane.
Not insane. You're an outlier. You are. But it is funny. I forgot that. That's right. Because I thought I think of myself as pretty type A, and I make three for the business and three for myself. And when you said 10. In my head, I was thinking you said even more than 10. That's why. But
Well, I have 12 right now, and they are all over the board in terms of professional and personal. One of them is to get my dogs in shape. So, they vary,
Resolutions for the whole family.
right?
do the dogs know about their resolution?
Oh yeah, they got these little Fi smart collars so I can track their steps. Like we're all in it.
Seriously? How did I not know that was the thing? Okay, so let's stay on topic. So when this conversation first started, Sarah, I feel like immediately went to it's because people are depressed. Um, my initial reaction was not so much depression, but a lack of clarity. Right, like it's hard to make a resolution if you don't know if you're going to be on lockdown for half the year, for another 3 months, for the whole year, or if. But uh, in the ensuing week, as we've been talking about this, there's a lot more indications that Sarah might be right. Like we were looking at this general social survey that the University of Chicago runs every year, and this is the first time since the start of this study in the 70s that more Americans say they're unhappy than say they're happy, which is just a remarkably depressing stat when you see this scale plotted over the last 40 years. And those 40 years include a lot of different periods of problems, but we've never seen more unhappy people. And for those of you that like numbers, about 25% of Americans say they're unhappy, and about 18% say they're happy, which is just kind of super depressing. So Sarah, you might be right. That's the way I've come to your side on this is
Well, that chart was just so, remarkable and also, depressing. Because I think different from those other years, perhaps, is that we've had this long period where everybody is experiencing the same kind of negatives together. And we know that that's not entirely true, but the pandemic has been there for everyone. So even if you think it's a hoax, it's still there, messing with your life no matter what. You can't make that go away. And that's different from all the other years that this survey has run, right? And then now to have even though we're further along actually in kind of fighting the pandemic, the all we're living with all of the other sorts of fallout that's happened. So like the economy is good but also terrible, right? Employment is good but also terrible. Like everything, nobody knows what is good or bad anymore almost. And the uncertainty makes it difficult. So even if you're not depressed, nobody knows what life is going to look like next year. We thought we might have known what it was going to look like last year, and we were wrong. And so now we know not to even think about it because it's just so uncertain. And then Omicron did hit it right at the time where if that had not happened, the Delta wave would have been receding, and I think we would have seen a lot more resolution making because people would have felt more hopeful. But now I think this is just my own speculation, obviously, but the sense that there's just going to be one variant after another now I think people have taken that and accepted it, and we're seeing that in the data.
Well, and resolutions are such a leap of faith already, right? Like 4 out of 5 of them fail. And half of people fail by the end of January on their resolutions, right? So it's already sort of like a hard to win game. So if you're depressed and you're already feeling not the best outlook on life, making a resolution that is going to be hard to accomplish is probably not your first move, right? I mean, and the reason they fail, right, is because people aren't making specific ones. It's really hard to make a specific resolution in a constantly changing environment or in one that is fraught with uncertainty. So I think it makes sense that if you're thinking through like I want to make a realistic resolution, most of them are about sort of aesthetics or losing weight, quitting a habit, those types of things. Those are crutches that we sometimes need in these really depressing times. So, it's like it's not only is it a depressing time, I think it's even harder to make accomplishments on what most of our resolutions focus on because of all the uncertainty.
It strikes me as I think important that what Maggie just said pretty quickly there is not something I knew before we started this study 3 years ago. I had no idea how many resolutions failed. When we first started this study, I've always made resolutions, and I always got the sense that most people did, or I always assumed most people did. I don't know. To be honest with you, I guess I never thought too much about it. But when we did this study, which the first time was 3 years ago, I was actually shocked to find out that so many people gave up on their resolutions so quickly. And then when we started talking about this, I don't know if either of you two remember offhand, but it is something like what, like 50% of them are they've given up by February 1st or something like that. Like half of all resolutions they've kind of
I-
they've already
yeah, I
admitted
mean,
they're not going to make.
right. I mean, and it's crazy if you Google resolutions, which is, I don't really recommend doing that. The first thing that comes up is like, what should my resolution be? Which is like a recipe for failure already, right? Because you have to be connected to the resolution to like even think you're going to achieve it. But there's all these articles that are like the 50 best resolutions, or it's that's the number one reason they fail is because they aren't like personal enough, or they're not sort of like this thing that you really want and need to do. So I think that part is fascinating too.
I think that New Year's there's the sense that everybody makes them comes partly from stories like that, because the media is just awash in New Year's resolution stories, but and then also how they all fail. But I also think that just New Year's is not a good time to make resolutions. This is not the beginning of the new year in terms of like our animal sense of ourself. And the time to make resolutions is in the springtime. And so we're setting ourselves up for failure by trying to change our lives in the dead middle of winter, right after the holidays. Um, so
That's a great point.
I make the case for April 1st resolutions.
I completely agree with you. I make mine quarterly, so that way I get to start. I mean, I don't start over. I carry them through, but like it allows me to adjust them on a quarterly basis if needed. And I don't think of that as failure. It's evolution.
We also see, so last year we asked people if they'd made resolutions and then kept the, usually when we do this study we only ask for January, but I kept it in there for longer because I wanted to see if that number changed over time, and it did. So the number of people who said they made resolutions went down, and so I think there is a recategorizing of what you might have done as things move along. And it could be that the people who continue to say they made resolutions are the people who are successful in them, because we also see that the number of people who say that they've done a good job on the resolutions doesn't actually change that much. It's the number of people who say they made resolutions that changes.
I want to just throw one other piece of background information out there, because we have, the three of us, have looked at this data for 3 straight years. We've spent a lot of time talking about this, but for those of you that don't know, like we said before COVID, it was 62% of Americans, and that number has been pretty consistent for many years. So about 6 out of 10 people make resolutions, and the categories that they make resolutions in, the number one is around diet and nutrition. That's about 36% of people make resolutions in that area. Number two is fitness. Career and finance is 3. Personal growth, mental health, relationship kind of stuff are the other big categories. And this has been something that people have done for a long time. And as Sarah kind of hinted at, this is also a part of a massive marketing and publicity machine in January. So we have to take that with a grain of salt. That there's a little gasoline being poured on that fire, but it has been behavior that's been really stable. And so to go back to this point that half it's been cut in half through COVID is really a fascinating topic to me. So I want to maybe ask this question of you guys in one other way, which is, do you see a difference between being pessimistic and being depressed? Do you see that differently? And I might even throw one other word in there, which is kind of uncertainty, right? Um, because I think how we see this data, these 2 data points, people making less resolutions, people reporting they're being depressed. Um, it's really interesting to untangle. Like if COVID were to all of a sudden, be magically cured tomorrow, would you guys expect it to go back to 62%, or do you think there's lingering issues that would hold that down for some people?
These are hard questions. I don't think it will ever rebound back up to 60%. I just think that that's like, I don't know. I don't have empirical data that I could pull out and say, like, this is why it will not. But I do think, like, the collective atmosphere is just, I think it's more, I don't think cautious is the right word, or depressed. I think it's just more sort of like realistic, right? It's just not, there's the rose colored glasses have been taken off. And now there's this fear because it's happened. Not fear is probably not the right word. There's this risk aversion, perhaps, that, if this can happen and it can just kind of take down our way of life so quickly, can it happen again, or will something else come along that's like it? And so I do think that there's been like, the denominator of happiness has changed or something along those lines. It's a different playing field.
So just to restate, that the change you feel like is still COVID. So it won't recover from COVID. It's not that COVID came at a time of increased polarization or something else that pushed it down. When the reason you think it's never going to come back is a lasting repercussion of some sort of fear of a pandemic coming back.
I think it's just it's like revealed a lot of different tensions in our culture, society, whatever it is, right? So because we were already under the stress of COVID, so many other things came out too. I mean, if you look at any, like, politically, we're more polarized. Financially, I would guess we're more polarized as a country. So I just think it like exacerbated a lot of things, right? We talk about it exacerbating online fitness, but you have to imagine it's exacerbating other trends that are more like socioeconomic as well. And so I think those will be hard to recover from. I mean, recovery is probably not the right word either there, but I think it just exposed a lot of tensions that people are going to have, long-term impact from, or I mean, you could even say trauma from. I think that this has been a traumatic few years, and the trauma has been different for depending on who you are, like the level of it. And I think that that's something that will resonate in resolution numbers. I think they'll recover some. I think that we're at a low point. I hope that they come back. And I hope that I'm wrong. I hope that they come back and are, surpass, because I'm an optimistic person, but I think that there's going to be challenges to getting people back to a 60% of people making a resolution. I just don't see that in the near future.
How about you, Sarah?
I'll I'll take the other side of that. I think humans have short memories. And
Okay.
I don't think that resolution making will bounce back right away, but I think that it is something similar to how, what during the pandemic, there's this sense that things will never change. It's always going to be the way that it is right now. And it's very hard to even imagine like going to a party or, doing air kisses to people. And humans want to do that stuff. And so I think within a few years, we will be surprised at how normal life will seem again. And then we'll see resolution making come back up. Because we want to get together. We want to go out and see each other. We want to improve ourselves so that we can see and be seen. We want to be all better in the ways that resolution making is typically about. And while it might be dampened right now, I think all of the motivations that drive that desire to improve yourself will come back in time. Now, I'm not saying society won't be different, because it will, but the um, all of the things that drive us to improve ourselves, I think, will return.
I hope you're right. Chuck, you get to be the tiebreaker.
It's a really interesting question. I tend to be very optimistic. I a little bit more on Sarah's side, although this morning I was reading that there was it got a lot of publicity in different news outlets, but there was the big study of the U.S. Against the other G7 nations in terms of, we were the most polarized, the highest income inequality, and the highest death rate from COVID, and they were basically saying that those three things are very related, right? And you could almost turn this question around and say, if we were a little bit more, what's the right word for it here? To be careful how to say this nicely. If we were more the type of people that did make and stick to resolutions at a higher degree, then maybe we would be getting through COVID faster and better. Like some of these, some of this is self-inflicted, inflicted damage. A lot of it is self-inflicted damage, and it does. They do kind of relate, like. I think this kind of behavior, while it is like, I'm very type A, right? So I'll admit that right off the bat. But this kind of like forward-looking planning behavior, I think, is kind of critical to high-level functioning, right? Like it doesn't have to be super complicated, but the ability to look into the future and say, how should my life be different, and what are the steps I could take to get there. I do think that there's a huge age story here, right? Like, if you're 70 and you feel like your life's in a perfect place and you don't need to make major changes, I totally get that, and I think that that's something we've talked about before, that people almost age out of resolutions. But for a lot of people, I do think it actually would improve happiness. But I know very smart people who take the other side of that, and I'm totally fine with that. Because you could see, it is a little, you also have those like cognitive distortions that come in, right? Like when um if you aren't feeling optimistic, or you're feeling depressed, then you don't see some of those paths out of it.
I think having control over something, I'm not to say that you have control over your resolutions, but it is a form of exerting control on your situation when you make a resolution and try to stick to it, right? Particularly if it's like a habitual resolution. So I'm going to work out every day, or I'm going to, do X, Y, or Z on a regular basis. Like that can give you a sense of control, which then can, combat grief or depression or whatever. And so you asked earlier, is this depression, or is it, are, what is it? And I think that there's a lot of uncertainty, which is sort of, leading to more depression. And I wouldn't say one is it's not causation, it's more correlation, I think. But this idea that like the more uncertain things are, the more likely you are to be depressed, because you can't exert control over yourself or your surroundings. And so I think it's kind of all tied up. And so then the question becomes, okay, is there going to be less uncertainty in the future? And then does that make it easier for me to make resolutions? And we'll see that number go up. And I wonder if I do agree with both of you that yes, human nature is to want to better yourself and to connect with people and to kind of show your best foot forward when you do connect with people. But my skepticism comes around this certainty versus uncertainty piece of that puzzle. I think that there's always going to be something else. And if we don't learn how to adapt quickly, then that uncertainty level remains high, which then makes it hard to really encourage people to make resolutions that require some sense of certainty. So it's sort of like an endless cycle.
And I think that's really where this discussion started for me. Like when that's why I was surprised when Sarah immediately went to depression. Is I was like, well, I think to me it's more like lack of certainty. But then there's a lot of evidence that it is just straight up like people are depressed and they don't feel like getting up and making the
It
changes.
feels like it's just like escalation of number of things going wrong, right? So if it was any one thing in isolation, we might be okay. But like throw so many things at it at the same time, and there's like uncertainty and depression.
Mm-hmm. It's all of those things, and also fatigue, right, and feeling overwhelmed, uh, because of the uncertainty, because you're not feeling good, because you don't have any of the outlets that you used to have, or they're dramatically diminished. And therefore you don't feel a sense of control over your life. You can't see what your future is, and you're reacting all the time rather than proactively planning, which goes back to your point, Chuck. um, it's You're unable to think about the future and plan for it in a way that you might normally be, because you are held down by all of these negative things that um, are affecting you in overdetermined ways.
Sarah, are you a resolution maker? We didn't establish that. Chuck and I both
I
said that we make
am.
them.
I am. And this is the first year where I was overwhelmed. I couldn't get it together to make any. Usually I make some kind of, I think we've joked about this in the past. As a teenager, I once made the resolution to be perfect.
It's my favorite resolution of all time. Whenever I think about resolutions, I remember that because I think
So,
it's amazing.
And also she achieved it, right? She got there. So it's like
Right,
well,
totally. She achieved it and she's maintained it. Like, you
the
can
very
stop making
closest perfect
resolutions.
one I've ever met, right? Like she is.
this is the classic failed resolution. I failed right away. So now I make things that I know I can do. So every year, except for this year, usually I make a resolution around one thing that I can do that makes my life more sustainable. For a while, I've been eliminating various pieces of single-use plastic. That is like a really attainable goal. And then sometimes there's other things. I toyed with making a strength workout resolution. So I think I kind of made one that I was going to build more strength workouts into my schedule, but it never took the form of a real resolution because I was just too overwhelmed with everything going on to get it down. Usually I write them down.
That's what in mine this year is 3 strength workouts a week, which I hate. I love cardio. I hate strength. So it's
I'm
a
the
challenge
same.
for me.
Yeah.
And by the way, Sarah, you'll like this too. One of our household resolutions for the years, we started composting in December.
Oh, good for you.
Is that not the most hippie-ish thing ever? Right?
I have that on my list too. Um, like, in
You're
addition to
doing that too, Maggie? Is that
resolutions,
what you said?
yes, I found a company to help me do it. I can't do it all on my own because I live in a very urbanly dense area and it's a bad idea.
It's really difficult. It's like a really key thing you can do. It's for the climate. It's so effective for food waste. But if you live in an urban area, it's hard unless the city provides it.
Uh, that's pretty fascinating. I do. It's interesting. Maggie brought up this point. The illusion of control, which I think psychologists know is a little bit false, but it's very adaptive, right? The illusion is very beneficial in and of itself. Like, and that's it. Always bothers me when people are like, "Well, it's an illusion of control." And it's like, yeah, but that illusion of control actually helps you, makes you. It always when they do those happiness studies and they find out that the happiest people are actually least realistic about what other people think of them. Well, that's great, good for them. Like, right? I mean, it's like I think there's something to that with resolutions, but I also think there's something to the fact that it does, every step you take is progress. So forcing yourself to take 3, even if you don't make it to 10 or whatever, is progress. So I think there's a very valuable component to it. So it does, to me, it's a really big deal that to see that 30% of people that used to make resolutions are lapsing on it. Like, that's a big change. And it's just a signal of what must be a lot of other small changes in their lives are going on.
On the other hand, from State of Our Health, we see that more people over the pandemic have gotten engaged and more engaged, I should say, with nutrition or fitness. So there has been improvement um, among, it's mainly millennials, but it's not just them. So a lot of people did take the time to invest and have stuck with it for 2 years now.
I think that engagement too, it's changed, right? Like, we see this more like holistic engagement with health and with fitness and nutrition, and whether that translates to wellness or mindfulness or kind of what any of those other areas. I think that there's like a we're seeing, and Sarah, well, you'll know the numbers much better than I, but like this idea that achieving a work-life balance is going up in terms of priorities. And so it's interesting to see how there does seem to be this fundamental shift in, like, I do need to take care of myself, or you know invest in other areas of my life beyond just work and finance and things like that. So I think that, like, the benefit that we hope to get from resolutions may be happening, like you said, Sarah, without the resolution, which is very promising.
Right. So next year is going to be pretty fascinating. Would you guys be willing to take a gander at what you think the percent will be next year?
42.
Oh, a third recovery. All right. What do you think, sir?
Hmm. I'll go lower than Maggie. I'll say 37.
Now we've contradicted ourselves, Sarah.
I know. I'm not sure. So, because I don't know what will happen. And if there, even if we get this, even if there's no more like variants that come along, there will still be another wave of COVID that happens next winter when the flu happens too. And just don't know what that's going to look like.
I'm going to
So,
go over
Chuck.
the top of both of you and say it goes back to 2020 levels. I'm going to say back to 50%.
Oh, okay.
I'm going to go bullish on this. I don't know. I just think that there was something about this. I think it's just the speed of it, but I think there was something about this. I could never say the word correctly. Omicron or whatever wave that caught people by surprise, and I think that really impacted things. But I kind of think I do think, even though this is like was said way too often at the beginning of it, I do think eventually we are going to have to learn to make this more like the flu, where it's going to come, people are going to get sick. And I think that obviously for the unvaccinated people, it's not that, but for the vaccinated people, it is kind of that now. So it's kind of, I think that we will, those people, like your earlier point, Sarah, they want to go out, they want to go places. Like everyone, you see that in the travel searches and all this, there's all this data that people are feeling pent up. Um, so I kind of think that they'll get back to it, but that may be I could see myself being a little bit too bullish on that call. But 37 sounds too low to me. And Maggie, you
That's
said
why
42?
42 is the perfect number.
42, yeah, that still seems like not much of a recovery. Only a third of people coming back. Like,
I think this year, I mean, I think it takes, grief is a long process. It's going to take a while for people to feel certain again, and to not, to sort of reestablish routines. And I don't think they'll be the same routines, right? This whole idea of like back to normal doesn't exist anymore, right? It's whatever the new reality is. And I think that just takes time. There's sort of like I don't think it'll happen in the next 11 months. But
it's funny. I actually have two thoughts that are completely unrelated. I was just trying to which one to share, but when Sarah was talking about how people are going, they're more engaged with the nutrition and they are working out. I can't tell you how many people just. I live in Los Angeles. For those of you that don't know, I can't tell you how many conversations I've been in with Los Angeles of where people explain to me how much of their daily life they've gotten back because of traffic. Which obviously, if you're someone that started working remotely, that number is regularly people tell me they've gotten 2 hours a day back. But even people that do commute to a job talk about how much less traffic there is now, how much faster that commute is now. What used to be an hour is now to like 25 minutes for a lot of people, and how that opens up for many people. The conversation goes to, so I work out more now. I'm able to get so it turns to fitness quickly. Um, so it'll be interesting to see kind of if that continues. But the other one other thing I was going to say that's completely unrelated and almost like the other side of that coin is I can't believe how many people are now telling me that they really miss things that were a break at first. Like one thing people really talk about is like water cooler conversations at the office, right? Or they don't like the quietness. Even if they go to an office, there's not as many people there, and they really miss those conversations. So it'll be. I have no idea how this is all going to play out, and I know both of those are contradictory statements. But I think that is a tension a lot of people are living with, right? Like if you say, "What is the new normal?" Do they don't really want to go back to the way it was, but they're not quite. They do want some of that.
I don't know. I think that's the bottom line, that there's all these tensions at play. And you have to figure out, like, which tension will win out. Is it going to be uncertainty, control? Like, I want time back versus connection. I don't know. I wonder if there's going to be like this. I always think about this with work travel. Like, prior to COVID, we didn't, I traveled a lot, probably 1 to 2 times a month at least all year long. And I haven't been on a business trip in 2 years, right? And I'm just waiting for like the first person to start traveling. And then I think it'll like quickly ramp up and we'll all be traveling. And so I wonder if there are other things like that. Like, will it become like one person goes back to the office and then everyone goes? Or, I think it'll be interesting to see. And I think a lot of things will happen like that, like one person starts getting in shape and then we all decide we need to. And obviously it won't be that dramatic, but I do think some more trends will start as, they'll speed up once, sort of a critical mass starts doing them again.
That's what I think. There's the critical mass is the important part. I actually spoke with a class at UCLA. It was like an undergraduate class of careers for anthropologists. And it was their first day going hybrid. So half the people were in class and half the people were online. And I think we're all remote, but my husband also there's this hybrid work environment. And so when there's a lot of people in the office that you can see when you're on Zoom, you feel jealous. You want to be there with all those people. What are they doing? What are they talking about? And so once you start seeing that more and more, that's when people are going to go back. So yeah, if it's just one person, that's lonely and weird. But once it gets to be 5, 6, 7, and I don't know what that critical mass is. It's probably different for every office, for every gym. But yeah, once you start hearing that everybody else is doing it, that's when it starts to feel okay to do, because safety is a feeling.
Well, thankfully, we're not in real estate and having to make those decisions, right? We really, as market research, just got pretty lucky in this whole thing. I will just say, to echo Maggie's thought, I really miss business trips too, which I never thought I would say that in the first 6 months. I got a break for them. It was so magical, and now I'm kind of like, oh, I miss going to see clients and seeing how they're doing and just having some place to go. Anyhow, any
maybe
final
your
thoughts?
resolution should be more business trips, and then that way we can fulfill that.
Exactly. Any final thoughts on resolutions or anything else you think we should circle back on before we close this out?
I am just fascinated to see what will happen next year. And I'm fascinated to see how the young adults, if they continue to sort of double down on resolutions, or if that was more of a reaction to the current environment. So I think it'll be really interesting to see, what was kind of a pretty level trend, right? We took this huge dip, and it'll be really interesting to see what happens.
Yeah, I agree. The especially young adults who are the most likely to make resolutions, I feel like their lives have been upended in a way that is difficult for us to even understand as older. We have established careers, we have
Are
family
you saying
routines.
we're not young adults anymore?
No, we're not.
Oh, please.
Sorry.
Oh man.
But then at the same time, how are they going to come back when they've never known what quote unquote normal young adult life is in the first place?
Yeah. Well, we know the key to getting young adults to make resolutions next year is we just need the right TikTok influencer to make a video about it during the right 2-week period beforehand, and we'll be there. We'll get it up.
I like Sarah's idea. Like, let's move New Year's resolutions to April. It solves a lot of issues. I think we should push for that.
It's actually really, really smart. There is something to that. Like, the spring is rebirth, no question about it. Just do your taxes and make resolutions for the next year on April 15th. Is that what it's
right? Or maybe you make your resolutions when you get your refund or something like that.
Well, there you go. You should probably make it before you get the refund so that you
That's
can
true.
spend it wisely.
Right. And if you don't get a refund.
All right, you guys. Thank you very much. This was fun recording. Talk to you next week.